One of the 20th century's most inspiring events can be found in the ancient city of Toledo, Spain. Here we find the story of the men, women, and children who from July to September of 1936 valiantly defended the Alcazar, Toledo's principal fortress which throughout its history had served various purposes. During the 3rd century, when Iberia was under Roman rule, it was used as a palace. Then under Muslim rule in the 10th century, the palace of Alcazar was converted into a fortress. After the Christians of Spain retook control of Toledo, the Alcazar saw various periods of restorations undertaken by the kings Alfonso VI, Alfonso X, and Carlos I of Spain. By 1936, however, after having been restored following a fire in 1887, it had been in service as a military academy for more than 50 years. On July 17, 1936, the Spanish Civil War had begun as nationalist forces rose up in rebellion against the Republic which had barely been around for 5 years. During this month of July, no cadets were present for the same reason I won't be in school during July, summer vacation. On July 18, however, the Catholic Jose Moscardo y Duarte, the academy commandant, was tweeting into the radio when he heard of the reports of the nationalist rebellion which had kick-started in Morocco. After hearing this news, Moscardo traveled to Madrid to speak with other military officers on the matter. After speaking with some of them, he joined the movement. Upon Moscardo's return to Toledo without making any open or public declarations, Moscardo recruited and organized a significant number of officers for the cause. Lieutenant Colonel Pedro Romero Basart of the Civil Guard encouraged Moscardo to wait some more time before making any public declarations. This is because in Toledo there was an arms and ammunition factory present, and Colonel Romero believed it would be best to first secure a good amount of supplies from the factory inside the Alcazar. There would be mass in the Alcazar on July 19. The next day, on July 20, fighting across Spain continued, and during this time, many of Toledo's civilians seeking protection from the chaos and violence had found refuge in the Alcazar. Civil guardsmen, too, began coming into the Alcazar, many bringing their families. Later that same day, Moscardo and the other officers present agreed to formally put their support behind the nationalists. On July 21st, in the plaza of Socolover, Captain Emilio Vela Hidalgo would read a proclamation. He announced that Toledo rejected the legitimacy of the Second Spanish Republic and that they were now in a state of war.
Attention all Spaniards of Toledo! Attention all Spaniards of Toledo! I am now announcing to you here in the plaza of Zocolower that if you are cringe, we are now at a state of war. That's right, I didn't even address you by your ideology. I'm not addressing you as communist or as anarchist or the whatnot. I'm addressing you as cringe, and I will now portray you as the crying Jack and me as the Chad. Relax, dark humor. It's called a liberals.
A group of about 3,000 Republican men led by General Jose Riquelme y López Bago had been dispatched from Madrid and arrived in Toledo. Fighting began and machine guns set up by Moscardo's men slowed the Republicans down. Men from the Civil Guard loaded 8 trucks with ammunition from the arms factory and transported them into the Alcazar. The garrison of the Alcazar now had enough supplies to drag their defense on for weeks. After having transported as much as supplies as they could, the arms factory was destroyed to prevent the Republicans from making any good use of it. The following day, July 22, the Alcazar found itself under artillery shelling by the Republican forces. The Republic's Minister of Public Instruction phoned Moscardo, pleading for Moscardo and the Nationalists to surrender. Moscardo held a conference with the other officers about what to do, and the minister would be informed that the resistance would continue. The Alcazar would not surrender. After this call, on July 23, many priests in Toledo would be brutally murdered by Spanish Republicans. This was not an isolated incident. The murder of priests, nuns, and people of faith by communists, socialists, and anarchists during the Spanish Civil War would be a common occurrence. This is something that is often overlooked in this period of history, and I would really like to make a video in the future regarding this topic. At about 7 in the morning, the son of Moscardo, Luis, who was 24 years old, was held by the Checas. The Checas was effectively a paramilitary police, or as described by Warren H. Carroll in his book The Last Crusade, in Toledo, as in many other cities of Republican Spain. A committee of militant socialists and anarchists had been set up to question persons suspected of disloyalty to the Republic. These committees were universally called Checas, the Spanish spelling of the name Lenin had given to the first Soviet secret police. Checas. The boy was recognized to be Moscardo's son, and immediately Moscardo was telephoned by Candido Cabello, the man who recognized Luis as Moscardo's son. The following is the conversation that took place from the phone, again taken from Warren H. Carroll's book. The boy would not be killed on the spot, but would be killed a month later. Food supplies were starting to run out. Only a few beans and wheat remained, and all the flour had been used up by the 27th. Moscardo's plan proposed during the beginning of the siege to supply the Alcazar with food was to raid the city at night wherever food was stored. But due to immense Republican presence in the city, it was almost impossible to actually do this. Thus, the solution was rather desperate. Inside the Alcazar, there were 97 horses and 27 mules present. Each day, a single animal would be killed, and this would provide a small amount of food to distribute to everyone in the Alcazar. On the opening day of August 1936, Riquelme initiated his new strategy, using artillery to bombard the hell out of the Alcazar. This would be done daily, but the defenders of the Alcazar remained firm. On the 3rd of August, 20 men from the Alcazar were able to make their way into a warehouse full of wheat, thereby alleviating the food problem in the Alcazar. A few days later, on August 8, Republican air raids over the Alcazar began, dropping bombs and gases. At first, the presence of the gases was of great concern, but these gases turned out not to be deadly. Then, on August 16, using a stethoscope, the engineering officer present in the Alcazar detected activity under the fortress. The Republicans were making 2 tunnels under the Alcazar. Boosts in morale came to the defenders of the Alcazar when on the 17th on the radio it was heard of a nationalist army advancing towards them. And on the 23rd, a nationalist plane flew over the Alcazar dropping food and a letter from Franco himself calling for the heroic defenders to keep the resistance going. Very soon they would be relieved. On the 8th of September, Major Vicente Rojo Juch, Luch of the Republican Army called for a ceasefire in order to negotiate with Moscardo. Blindfolded by the nationalists, he was taken into the Alcazar. After the blindfold was taken off and he saw Moscardo, Rojo stretched his hand out to Moscardo. Moscardo did not shake the major's hand. Talks began in which Rojo requested for Moscardo to surrender to the Republican forces. Moscardo's position remained solid. He would not surrender. Before Rojo left, Moscardo made a request of his own. He asked for a priest to be allowed in the Alcazar. 3 days later, on September 11, out of respect for Moscardo, Rojo allowed a priest to go inside the Alcazar. A priest of left-wing tendencies, Enrique Vázquez Camarasa, was permitted inside the Alcazar for a few hours. Like Rojo, he was blindfolded while being taken inside the Alcazar. Here he provided general absolution and said mass. Under instructions by the Republicans to seize any chance he could use to urge a surrender, and with many of the defenders gathered around him, the priest urged for them to surrender, for soon they would be defeated. He warned that the women and children would die at the hands of the uncompromising garrison. Later, he also met with Moscardo and once more reiterated the point of the women and children. Carmen Romero de Salamanca, one of the women present in the Alcazar, was brought into the room, and she informed the priest that the women of the Alcazar were totally determined to remain with their husbands and children till the end, dead or alive. On September 13, the ambassador from Chile, José Ramón Gutiérrez, tried to call Moscardo to ask for his surrender. However, he'd be unable to get in contact with Moscardo. If by now you're wondering what happened to the tunnels the Republicans had been digging, well, by September 18 they were finished, and with 2.5 tons of TNT in both tunnels, they were ready to blow. Lieutenant Barber, the engineering officer in the Alcazar, who had first identified the noises underground being the excavation of tunnels, now reported no activity was heard. The only answer was that the tunnels were complete. People inside the Alcazar waited anxiously for what would happen next. One can only imagine what they thought, how they felt, knowing these moments would probably be their last. The faces of the people around them would be the last they would ever see. Francisco Largo Caballero, Prime Minister of the Second Republic since the 4th of September, gave the go-ahead for the bombs to be detonated. The bombs exploded, and to the astonishment of many, including myself when I first read about this, the defenders of the Alcazar remained alive. Though causing much damage throughout, only the southwest tower had been totally knocked down. There were only 5 casualties on the nationalist side as a direct result of the explosion. Almost immediately, the Republicans took this as their opportunity to finish what the explosion had miraculously failed to do, to wipe out the garrison. As the Republicans stormed the Alcazar, the sound of a trumpet could be heard calling the nationalists to rush and face the Republican enemy. Machine guns set up by nationalists were able to wipe out a group of Republicans. The Republicans drove a tank inside, which the nationalists attempted to counter by launching bombs at it. Though failing to actually destroy the tank, they did manage to make the tank retreat. From outside the Alcazar, a group of Republican soldiers were able to climb into the second floor and were using the strategic position to rain bullets down on the defenders from above. Because the stairs were wiped out in the explosion, the nationalist Lieutenant Benito Gomez Olivares, with a group of men, put together two ladders and climbed into the second floor where they cleared it of Republicans. It became clear the nationalists had held off against Republican attacks once more and, like always, refusing to surrender and determined to fight for their heroic cause. They wouldn't be able to comfortably sleep, however, because the Republicans would blast artillery shells during the night. Twice, once in the 20th and the second time in the 23rd of September, the Republicans would try to launch attacks with the aid of tanks, but both of these attacks would be repelled by the Nationalists. On the 25th of September, the noise of artillery barragements could be heard from the Alcazar. This, coupled with the direction from where the noise was coming from, it was evidence that there was a nationalist army on its way. The men were being led by General Jose Enrique Varela Iglesias and was arriving to relieve the defenders of the Alcazar. The nationalist force had been marching toward Madrid, but on the 21st of September, Franco redirected them to Toledo, staying true to his promise he had written on his letter to the defenders of the Alcazar a few weeks back. Some Republicans began withdrawing to Madrid, knowing the nationalists were quickly approaching. On the 26th, Varela's army had blocked the route to Madrid and were now only a few miles from Toledo. On the 27th, the situation was deteriorating for the Republicans, and they launched yet another desperate attack on the Alcazar, which, like the other time, failed to subdue the nationalist garrison. Fuck, guys, the nationalists are literally at our doorstep. What do we do? I've got it. I've got an idea. I'm a genius. We've charged at them several times already, and we failed. How about we do it again? You're a genius. There's no other way to put it. You're a genius. We charge the Alcazar. Oh man, I really thought that was gonna work. The Republicans again tried putting their luck on underground explosions. They exploded 1 ton of TNT, and just like the first load, they failed to wipe out the garrison or the part of the Alcazar held by the nationalist garrison which stood. By now, Varela had begun the assault against the Republicans, and the nationalist Lieutenant La Huerta, accompanied by 20 Moroccans, managed to get into Toledo through an unguarded point. La Huerta and the Moroccans made their way to the Alcazar. Things were in total disarray for the Republicans. Many, including the governor of Toledo, had fled, and men were refusing to follow orders. Still, though, some such as Mayor Luis Barcelo Jover were determined to keep fighting. On the 28th, fighting continued in Toledo, but it could be more accurately described as cleanup on aisle 5 as the nationalists were finishing off remaining resistance by Republicans. While this happened outside the Alcazar, La Huerta went inside the fortress of the Alcazar with the Jesuit Father Pujal. It was here that Moscardo was informed of the death of his son Luis, and Father Pujal said the Mass. The siege had ended, and Toledo had been seized by the nationalists. Following the end of the siege, Moscardo would be promoted to general and awarded the highest military honor in Spain, the Cross of St. Ferdinand. With the victory of the nationalists in the siege of the Alcazar, it would be a great morale boost for nationalists across Spain at the expense of the morale of the Republicans. A few years later, in 1940, Himmler would travel to Toledo and visit the Alcazar with Moscardo accompanying him. After the siege, the Alcazar was left totally ruined. However, since then it's been restored and today serves as a museum and library. Just like her brave defenders of 1936, the Alcazar remains strong and firm, possessing a heroic story to never forget.